The knock at the door came like a hammer, loud, unrelenting, and way too official for a Sunday morning. I was halfway through my coffee, standing barefoot in the kitchen when I heard it. I glanced at my wife, Zayla, who was polishing one of her duty belts at the dining table. "You expecting anyone?" "Nope," she said, sliding her belt aside. "But whoever that is, they're either selling something or about to regret waking us up this early." I opened the front door, and standing there were two men in what looked like police uniforms. Badges, duty belts, even radios on their shoulders. One had a clipboard. The other wore sunglasses like he thought he was in a movie. "Mr. Grady Renshaw?" the clipboard guy asked, already scribbling something. "That's me. You're in violation of several HOA regulations," he said, not even looking up, "including lawn maintenance, improper trash bin storage, and unauthorized vehicle in the driveway. You've been fined $200. "What?" I stepped back. "First off, that's garbage we mow every week and my truck's registered. Second, who exactly are you?" "We're with the Lakewood Neighborhood Compliance Patrol," the other guy said, flashing a badge way too fast. "Compliance Patrol," I repeated. That wasn't a thing. And I'd never seen either of them at a single meeting. Before I could say anything else, Zayla stepped beside me, in full uniform. Navy blue shirt, polished badge, utility belt, bodycam blinking red. The real deal. "Lakewood, what now?" she asked, arms crossed. "Because unless you're real officers, and spoiler, you're not, impersonating law enforcement is a felony." The clipboard guy blinked. "Ma'am, step aside, this doesn't concern you." Zayla pulled out her ID and held it up. "Sergeant Zayla Sorrells, Metro Police. Badge numbers right there." "Now, let's try again. Who sent you?" The one in sunglasses hesitated. "We're authorized by the Lakewood HOA." Zayla looked at me, then back at them. "That's cute, but the HOA doesn't have the legal authority to enforce anything with fake officers. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over whatever ID you have, or I'm calling this in." Both men turned pale. Clipboard guy actually took a step back. "You got a name?" I asked. "Or should I just call you Fraud 1 and Fraud 2 when I file charges?" They didn't answer. Instead, they power walked off my porch, muttering something about just trying to do their job. Zayla followed them halfway down the driveway. "Tell Karen Merriweather if she wants to play police, she better start studying for the academy," Zayla shouted after them. I nearly choked. Karen Merriweather. Of course it was her. President of the HOA, Queen of Petness. The same woman who once tried to fine us for holiday decorations left up past the acceptable grace period because of one string of lights I forgot on the porch. Zayla turned back to me. "They're lucky I didn't cuff them," I nodded. "She's gone off the rails this time." Zayla's eyes narrowed. "No, this isn't petty anymore, this is criminal." And I knew right then we weren't just dealing with a power-hungry HOA president anymore. We were dealing with someone who thought she was untouchable. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. HOA story HO, a stories homeowners association stories by Monday morning. Zayla had already pulled 2 strings and sent 3 emails. She didn't say much as she stood by the kitchen island, sipping her black coffee and scanning her phone, but I could tell from the way her jaw set that she was building a case in her head. Not just a complaint, a case. "They used municipal-style badges," she said without looking up. "Almost identical to ours. That alone is impersonation of a public servant." I leaned against the counter, flipping through the mail that had come in. Nothing from the HOA, though I half expected a cease and desist written in glitter ink. "You think they'll try it again?" I asked. Zayla tapped her screen. "They won't. Not if they have functioning brain cells, but if they do, I'll be waiting with a body cam backup and a very bored assistant DA who owes me a favor." That last part got my attention. "You called the DA's office, not just them," she said, finally looking up. "I looped in the State Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Division. If Karen and her little cosplay goons try anything else, they'll be staring down a full-blown criminal investigation." I whistled. "You always go for the jugular." "I don't like bullies," she said. "And this one's gotten too comfortable." That afternoon, I installed a new security system. 4 cameras, all motion activated with cloud backups and live monitoring. I angled one directly at the street-facing side of the house, just in case someone decided to come lurking again. The other 3 covered the door, driveway, and side gate. Zayla came out with a flash drive in her hand. "Here's the footage from yesterday. Pulled it off our doorbell cam. You can see Badge Boy and Clipboard Carl real clear." I popped it into my laptop. The video showed both men approaching, lingering on the porch, and flashing those knockoff badges like they were in a low-budget procedural. Zayla's voice was calm, collected, authoritative. Their faces, not so much. "You think they'll try to deny it?" I asked. "They can try," she said. "But with this footage, I'll bury them in affidavits." By Tuesday, things escalated. A woman from 3 doors down, Marcia Pennington, rang our bell. She was holding a manila envelope and looked shaken. "I heard what happened," she said, eyes darting around like she half expected someone to pop out of the bushes. "I think they came to my house too, last week. Said my porch light was a code violation for being too bright, gave me a ticket. I paid it." Zayla took the envelope and motioned her inside. The ticket was printed on what looked like recycled office paper, with a fake seal that said Neighborhood Enforcement Division in a font that screamed Microsoft Word. At the bottom, it instructed payment be made to a P.O. box, not the HOA office. The address wasn't even in our zip code. "How much did they charge you?" Zayla asked, already scanning the details. $75, Marcia said. "Cash." I left it in an envelope at the HOA drop box like they told me. I clenched my fists. "They're running a scam," Zayla nodded slowly. "They're laundering money through fake citations. If they've done this to multiple residents, we're looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, and possibly racketeering." We made copies of the citation and added it to the growing file. That evening, Zayla met with Detective Ramos, a friend of hers from the organized crime unit. She didn't say much when she got home, but she dropped a folder on the kitchen table labeled Confidential. "Ramos is in," she said. "They've had whispers of HOA boards getting too greedy in other neighborhoods, but nothing this bold. He's opening an inquiry." That same night, our street turned into a whisper network. People came by in 2s and 3s, some with envelopes, some with screenshots of emails received from supposed compliance officers. All of them had been fined for absurd things: mailboxes being too reflective, garden gnomes creating visual clutter, and even one guy charged $100 because his dog barked while someone walked past. Zayla cataloged everything, every receipt, every notice, every digital file. I printed out a giant aerial map of the neighborhood and pinned red dots on every house that had received one of the fake citations. By the time we were done, the map looked like a war zone. But it was what Marcia said next that made everything click. "They always came right after the HOA meetings," she said, "like clockwork, as if they knew who to target." That's when Zayla's eyes narrowed. "They're using the complaint records from the meetings, selective enforcement. They're turning petty grievances into fake fines." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Zayla insisted we go, not just to confront Karen, but to gather intel. "Let them talk," she said. "The more they say, the easier it is to bring them down." Thursday came fast. The community center was packed tighter than usual. Word had clearly spread. Some residents sat with arms crossed, others whispered to their neighbors. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her ever-loyal secretary Nina, and a man I didn't recognize, tall, stiff, with a Bluetooth earpiece and a sour expression. Zayla and I sat near the back. She wore civilian clothes but carried her badge in her bag. Her recorder was already running. "We'll begin by addressing maintenance violations," Karen said, tapping her gavel like she thought it gave her power. "Several residents have failed to comply with community standards, and the Neighborhood Compliance Patrol has issued appropriate citations." "Who authorized that patrol?" someone shouted from the middle row. Karen didn't flinch. "The board voted on it." It's within our rights to appoint enforcement personnel. You mean the guys pretending to be cops? Zayla said, standing up, all heads turned. Karen's eyes locked onto her, lips pulling into a tight line. That's a serious accusation, she said. It's not an accusation, Zayla replied. It's a fact. I have video footage, sworn statements, and documentation proving that your so-called compliance officers impersonated law enforcement and issued fraudulent fines. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen tried to recover. The Neighborhood Compliance Patrol is a volunteer program designed to extort your neighbors, Zayla cut in. Because that's what it looks like. Especially when the money from those citations goes to a P.O. box that doesn't belong to the HOA. The tall man beside Karen leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Zayla walked forward and placed a folder on the table. This includes the footage of the impersonation, copies of the fake citations, and a list of victims. As of this afternoon, this information has also been submitted to Metro PD's Financial Crimes Unit and the State Attorney General's office. Karen's face lost all color. Her hand trembled as she reached for the folder. Zayla turned to the crowd. If anyone here has been fined by someone who wasn't wearing an official city or county badge, you may be entitled to restitution. Fraud charges are pending. And if you've paid anything to a P.O. box on these citations, I strongly suggest you file a police report. Tonight. The room erupted. People stood. Some cheered. Others demanded Karen resign on the spot. Nina grabbed her purse and bolted. The tall man beside Karen tried to calm things down, but it was too late. The tide had turned. Zayla walked back to me, her expression unreadable. You think she'll try to run? I asked. She won't get far, she said. Ramos is getting a warrant in the morning. As we left the community center, the air felt different, lighter. Like the neighborhood was finally exhaling after years of being smothered under Karen's thumb. We didn't celebrate. Not yet. But as we walked home, I noticed something for the first time in weeks. Porch lights lit without fear, children playing past dusk, and neighbors talking openly again. Zayla looked over at me and nodded just once. The battle wasn't over, but the war had shifted in our favor. Zayla paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear, while I sat at the table spreading out the last stack of printed emails from neighbors. Her voice was all clipped precision, now talking to someone high up, someone who knew how to move things along. I didn't interrupt. I just kept highlighting payment instructions, mapping out patterns. When she finally ended the call, she exhaled through her nose and tossed the phone on the couch. Warrants are being drawn up tonight, she said. But it gets worse. Ramos ran the P.O. box. It's registered to a shell company. Guess who the listed agent is? I raised an eyebrow. Karen's brother. Lives out in Henderson. And he's got Pryor's wire fraud, tax evasion, even a sealed case that probably explains how he's still walking around. I leaned back in my chair. So this wasn't just about HOA power trips. This was organized theft. They were laundering HOA money through a fake enforcement program propped up by fraud and intimidation, she said. And they used that shell company to make it all look legitimate on paper. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, porch lights flickered on as neighbors returned from work. A few houses still had the same bland beige mailboxes Karen had mandated 5 years ago. But already I saw signs of pushback, one mailbox painted dark green, another one with a little birdhouse built on top. People were testing the waters again. What do we do now? I asked. Zayla picked up the stack of statements we'd collected. Now we prep for fallout. Once the arrests hit, the board will scramble. We need to make sure they don't bury anything, documents, financial records, anything that ties back to the shell company. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Where are you going? Library, she said. Public records room. I want to know when that shell company started receiving HOA payments. If it predates the compliance patrol, we've got embezzlement. While she was gone, I called Ed from down the street. He was a retired auditor and had offered to help go through the HOA's financial reports. He showed up 10 minutes later with a yellow legal pad and 3 highlighters. We sat on the porch, flipping through a binder I'd pulled from our storage the last 3 years of HOA budget reports, which I'd copied after the time Karen tried to raise our dues without a vote. "Look here," Ed said, tapping a column. "This community safety and enforcement line item jumps from $600 to over $14,000 in 1 year, and there's no breakdown for how that money was spent." I nodded. That's when the fake patrol started showing up. He flipped another page. No receipts, no contractor names, and the signatures on the approval forms all scanned in. That's sloppy even for a shady HOA. I took photos of each suspicious page. Zayla would want everything digitally backed up. Ed flipped one more page and paused. "There's a check here made out to Blue Ridge Neighborhood Services. That name match anything?" I pulled my laptop over. A quick search turned up a dissolved LLC registered 2 years ago with a mailing address matching the same P.O. box used on the fake tickets. "They got lazy," I muttered. "Didn't bother masking the name after the first year." Zayler returned after sunset, carrying a stack of photocopies and a grim expression. "They've been routing HOA funds through 3 different shell companies," she said. "Each one dissolved after a year with a new one registered just before the old one closed, and all registered to either Karen's brother or her husband's cousin." Ed let out a low whistle. "That's a full-blown fraud ring," Zayla nodded. "And they've probably been doing it for years." The next morning, the raid happened. Marked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood just after 8, 3 unmarked sedans, 2 cruisers. Officers moved with precision, no sirens, just flashing lights and purpose. They hit Karen's house first. Her Escalade was in the driveway, still warm. Zayla and I stayed on the sidewalk, arms folded, as the front door opened and Karen stepped out in a bathrobe, flanked by 2 plainclothes detectives. Her expression was glassy with disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend this was happening in real life. They said something to her. She shook her head. Then they showed her a paper, likely the warrant, and cuffed her right there on the porch. A few neighbors gathered, silent, watching from across their lawns. No one said a word. 15 minutes later, they took her husband out too, wearing gym shorts and no shoes. Then a third arrest, Nina, the secretary. She tried to plead with the officers, something about not knowing what was going on, but they just read her rights. Zayla's phone buzzed. She answered, listened for a moment, then hung up. "That's 3. Ramos says they've got probable cause on 4 more. The DA is calling it a conspiracy to defraud a homeowners association under color of authority." "Never heard of that charge," I said. "They're stitching it together from fraud, conspiracy, impersonation, and misappropriation. It's rare. But it's going to stick." By the end of the day, 7 members of the board were in custody. The HOA office, a tiny beige building near the community pool, was sealed off with caution tape. Forensic accountants were already inside, pulling hard drives and sifting through months of paper files. That night, the neighborhood came alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. People knocked on doors, passed around flyers for a town hall, and organized a temporary committee to handle essentials like pool maintenance and landscaping. A few folks brought folding chairs into the cul-de-sac and passed around lemonade like it was some kind of block party. Zayla didn't join. She sat on the porch, watching the stars edge into view, silent in that way she always got after a case wrapped up. I sat beside her. "You did what no one else could. You broke their grip." She didn't look at me. "There's going to be backlash. People who supported Karen because they benefited, they won't disappear quietly." "We'll handle them," I said. "Same way we handled her." She finally turned to me. "We're not done yet. We need to make sure the next board can't pull something like this again." I nodded. "We'll write new bylaws, require external audits, make sure nobody can authorize payments without documentation." She leaned back. "And we get that ridiculous compliance patrol clause removed for good." We sat there a long time, the quiet humming with the distant sound of kids laughing and sprinklers ticking on nearby lawns. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was breathing again, and this time it was ours. Zayla stood and stretched. Let's start drafting those reforms tomorrow. First thing, I asked. She shook her head. After coffee. Fair enough, Friday morning brought a knock, but this time it was expected. Zayla opened the door before I could even get up from the couch. Detective Ramos stood there in a gray blazer and jeans, looking tired but satisfied. A plainclothes officer stood just behind him, holding a slim black case. "You two got a minute?" Ramos asked. Zayla nodded and stepped back. "You bring good news or more headaches?" "Little of both," he said, stepping inside. "We just finished the forensic sweep at the HOA office. Took all night. You're going to want to hear this." He sat at our kitchen table and opened the case. Inside were 2 external drives and a stack of printed spreadsheets. The officer with him, Detective Leland, according to his badge, laid out a manila folder and started lining up photos. "Turns out Karen and her crew weren't just rerouting HOA dues," Ramos said. "They were collecting extra payments under fake programs and funneling the money into offshore accounts. The shell companies were just the surface." Zayla leaned in. "How long?" 7 years, Leland said. "We found bank statements dating back to the first shell account. They started small. 1,000 here, 2 grand there. But by last year they were pulling in nearly 35,000 a quarter." I sat down across from him. "How did no one catch it?" "Because they were filing partial reports," Ramos said, "just enough to pass a casual audit. And they never let residents vote on budget changes. Everything was approved internally with falsified minutes." Zayla folded her arms. "So they forged board meeting records too?" "Every single one," Leland confirmed. "We have handwriting analysis underway. It looks like only 2 people ever signed anything. Karen and her vice president." Zayla tapped the folder. "What's this?" Ramos flipped it open. Inside were color photos of a storage unit. Boxes stacked floor to ceiling, some labeled with years, others with vague terms like correspondence or maintenance reports. "We found this unit under Nina's name," Ramos said. Inside were the real board minutes and financial records. "They kept the originals in case they needed to cover their tracks." Zayla's face tightened. "So they knew what they were doing." "Every step of the way," Ramos said. "They even had a spreadsheet tracking funds by shell company. They called it the back pocket ledger. We're charging them with felony fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and embezzlement. The DA's office is filing motions to freeze their assets." I exhaled slowly. "What about the people they fined?" "The ones who paid cash. We've got a restitution program in the works," Leland said. "The AG's office is coordinating with county officials to issue refunds. Anyone who can show proof of payment will be reimbursed." Zayla's eyes narrowed. "And the fake badges?" "The impersonation charges, already charged," Ramos said, "plus federal impersonation of a law enforcement officer. The 2 guys who came to your door are flipping. They're giving full statements in exchange for reduced sentences." Zayla nodded slowly. "That's something." Ramos gathered the papers. "We'll need your footage and copies of the documents you collected. The DA wants to compile a chain of evidence before the arraignments." "You'll have it tonight," Zayla said. "I've got everything backed up in triplicate. After they left, we didn't say much. There was nothing left to plan. The machine Karen had built was dismantled. All that remained was the cleanup. By Sunday, word had spread beyond the neighborhood. A local news van parked outside the community center, interviewing residents with blurred faces and altered voices. Headlines ran with phrases like "HOA crime ring busted" and "fake patrol scheme defrauds dozens." The temporary neighborhood committee called an emergency meeting. They asked Zayla to sit in, not as a cop, but as someone who had helped right the ship. She refused the chair they offered her at the head table and sat in the front row instead. A woman named Daria, mid-30s, sharp eyes, worked in municipal planning, volunteered to lead the interim board. She proposed a full rewrite of the bylaws, including a clause that prohibited any future enforcement bodies that weren't part of city code. Another resident, Marcus, A quiet electrician with a knack for numbers offered to oversee budget transparency. He suggested quarterly open audits posted online with line-by-line breakdowns. Each new proposal was met with applause. No gavel, no pomp, just neighbors taking back control. When the floor opened for public comment, Zayla finally stood. "I'm not here as a cop," she said. "Just as someone who lives here. What happened wasn't just theft, it was an abuse of trust. People used to be afraid to speak up. That ends now. We don't need fear to run a neighborhood, we need accountability. And we need each other." The applause this time didn't end quickly. It rolled like a wave through the room. Back home, I found her on the porch again, arms resting on the railing, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of copper and violet. "Feels different now," I said. "It is different." "Think they'll try something like this again?" "No," she said. "Not here." We sat in silence as the last light faded. No patrol cars, no clipboard bullies. Just the buzz of sprinklers and the distant bark of a dog. By the following week, the DA's office announced formal indictments on all 7 arrested HOA members. Karen was being charged under the state's Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The maximum sentence was 25 years. The news report showed her being led into court in a navy suit, wrists cuffed in front of her. No smugness, no speeches, just a quiet shuffle toward justice. Zayla saved the clip, but never watched it twice. Later, we received a letter from the county clerk. It confirmed that all fraudulent citations had been expunged from public records and that the HOA's authority to issue citations had been suspended indefinitely. The neighborhood changed after that. Lawn decorations came back in full force. Someone painted a mural on their garage door, a massive tree with roots stretching into a field of flowers. Kids started chalking the sidewalks without fear of fines. And for the first time in years, the community pool opened without a members-only sign posted by some self-appointed enforcer. One evening, as Zayla organized the last of the files into a storage bin, she looked over at me. "You know," she said, "we could have moved, after everything." "Could have walked away," I nodded. "But we didn't." "No," she said, "we stayed, and we made it better." I placed the lid on the bin and stacked it in the closet. We made it honest, and that was enough. Justice hadn't just come in handcuffs. It came in conversations, in bylaws rewritten by people who cared, in porches once silent now filled with laughter. It came in the slow, steady rebuilding of trust. And it came because one morning, a fake officer knocked on the wrong door and a real one answered.